said something about the poets of the dawn without going much into detail because we are not taking up a detailed study but a rough outline of what Sri Aurobindo has to say on poetry, its origin, its process, its function, its future, and how it is related to yoga. That we saw yesterday. We are trying to see how this relates itself to his main purpose of the curve which the human consciousness is taking or has to take if it wants to go out of this limited circle of rational individualism, which is now the ruling value of human life. And because it has come practically to an end and it must go on endlessly repeating itself, or it must open out into a new level of consciousness. Now, whether in any cultural activities of man, like poetry, like arts, or like social reconstruction, are there signs to show that this may happen or can happen? And he is trying to show that that seems to be something which certainly can happen. There are great possibilities and chances of a change from mental consciousness to some higher level, maybe intuitive consciousness, maybe higher mind consciousness, might be reference to the soul of man, but something more than reason, more than mere intellectuality. That seems to be the direction towards which evolution must point. Now, here uh, we are done with the poets of the dawn, so we will not repeat. I take up now the forerunners of this new movement which he envisages, the forerunners of future poetry. The forerunners of the spirit, new spirits in English poetry are Whitman, Walt Whitman, Edward Carpenter, W.B. Yeats, A.E. Meredith, Stevens Phillip, and Tagore. The main, he doesn't take detail, he's taking a general sweep of poets all over. And he says these are the forerunners of the new spirit or new expression that is going to come, not now, perhaps 50 years after, 100 years after, we don't know when, but it has got to come. And these are the forerunners. Forerunners are Whitman, Edward Carpenter, W.B. Yeats, A.E. Tagore, Meredith, and, Stevens Phillip. Now, in all these, we find common characteristics, certain common characteristics. One, a novel use of rhythmic movement of expression. The rhythm which they, use for their poetic expression is a novel. He calls it an endeavor to say our inmost in the inmost way. I think this is from Meredith. Our inmost in the inmost. I think it was a song directed to skylark or to some bird, and yes, and he there it is a line in Meredith, you see, which says to say our inmost in the inmost way. That is the characteristic of these poets and their manner. One thing in a technique which you find is that the technique is used only to bring about the inmost expression. That's one. Secondly, this inwardness is a triumph of that poetical speech. The culmination of the moment is seen in soul's own delivered self vision in all things. It is not the mind, it is not imagination, it is not sense that sees, but the soul that uses its instrument and directly tries to see. That is the character of these forerunners. They see nature, they experience, and the experience is not taken hold of and rendered into poetry either by the sense or by the mind or by imagination, but by the deepest psychic being the soul. And immediately the sensation or the experience or the shock of the life is turned into an expression of the inmost being. Well, it is not fully successful, but it is there, the tendency. Well, this is the characteristic, it is. Now, the 19th century was intellectual and not intuitive. The 19th century was intellectual and not intuitive. It was critical, not so creative. It was more analytical and curiously observative, but not deep enough or fine in its aesthetic feeling, in its sense of perception of beauty. The 19th century had nothing very great. Poetry today is as he calls it, brilliant, curious, careful, inventive, interested, and interesting. Today's poetry. It is having a great range. It is elaborately aesthetic. It is aesthetic elaborately, with great labor, artificiality perhaps, or a trial. In short, there is a stress of thought, but not greatness of creation. Thought seems to undergo a stress, undergo a sort of pressure, but the greatness is not felt. You see, it is lost in detail or small thing something. It has intellectual idealism, but not sufficient height of wing. Its ideals are intellectual and therefore confined within the realm of the mind. The flight of the spirit in modern poetry does not go high enough. The idealism is not only confined to mind, mental region. No sufficient height of wing or fine spiritual suggestion. In the best work of modern poets, he says, the intellectual way of looking at things is being slowly transcended or is raising itself from thought to vision. From thought to vision to sight. It's not thinking, but something seen. And when something is seen, the poet only brings what he sees without bringing in the element of ratiocination or process of thinking. Not that, oh, I think, I saw something which I want to now put in language. You see, it is not product here of the mind, but it is something that has been seen and something seen behind the veil of nature, behind an experience, behind a movement, behind a shock of life. It is not the shock itself, but what the poet has seen behind. And he has not thought it. He has not thought it, he has seen it. Well, there is a difference, you see, between when one thinks and when one sees. Well, that is a characteristic power of the poet. Yes, from life and nature seen by the senses, the eye of intellect to life and nature seen and felt by the soul. These things are seen and felt, not by the mind, not by the senses, but by the soul. Mankind seems to be in search for its soul. The whole view and sense of existence has deepened into a greater subjectivity. This is universal subjectivity, a sense of community of individual soul with universal soul and universal mind. Profounder ranges of consciousness are now being sounded, and a great individual and universal soul of mankind is being felt. You see, behind it is the feeling of this great universal and individual soul of mankind. Nature is not merely confined to her appearance and aesthetic appeal. Nature is being seen in her hidden suggestions, not in her aesthetic appeal or in her outer appearance of beauty to the senses only, but in her hidden suggestion, finer impressions, and even in her spiritual relation, identity with the spirit. Nature is seen to be alive, an expression of something which is spiritual. That is coming slowly into poetry. Even the material world is not excluded from the operation of this new way of seeing in poetry. Even the material world, things that lie behind the material world are seen for the first time. Communion of man's soul and the divine, not in the old conventional religious forms, but enlightened by the sense of the infinite and the eternal, is now finding expression in poetry. Not religious way, not conventional and traditional form. You see, it is coming back to this. It is finding expression in poetry. Whitman is the conscious prophet of this new spirit. Now he takes Whitman and shows that this is borne out by leaves of grass, you see. He has the definite consciousness of himself as the representative voice of the age. You find Whitman himself in this preface to the Leaves of Grass, I don't know how many of you read, it is now 100 years before, you see, it's a 100 years old business, but therein he is very conscious about his being the voice of the times. He knows that he is a prophet. There is no question to his mind. People may not accept, but he knows he is a prophet. You see, a representative voice of the age. And he boldly proclaims, the modern man I sing, is it not? That's how the Leaves of Grass begins. You see? I sing the song democratic, the modern man I sing. Yeah. He boldly doesn't want to go back to the past heroes of Greek, and in the introduction he is very strong against what is these old heroes being called when actually you have heroes all around you, he says, you see, and this world of wonder is around you, and the greatness of man is already, being felt and is being experienced around. Why you go back to the classical times and bring back some either epic heroes or heroes of the past or heroes of Europe, he says. We have sufficient material of heroism all around us. Even though he speaks of the greatness of man, as he sees them, he is conscious of a greater self in individual man and in the race. He sees the human being around him great, but he knows that they represent or they have behind him a greater self. He has his feet on earth and his hold is on life. He holds his life. But the intellectual and the vital self in man is converted to the spiritual in Whitman's vision. He does not think of going away and realizing divinity somewhere else, right here. Yes. But the vital man and the intellectual man is converted to spiritual in Whitman. He is conscious of the divinity of soul in man and its kinship to the divinity of the eternal. In Whitman, you will see that there's a very powerful strain missed by most of the people who do not understand him. That which the old Indian seers called the Mahan Atma, the great soul, great spirit, which is seen through the vast strain of cosmic thought and cosmic life, is the subject of some of his highest strains, Whitman's. He gets to it repeatedly through his vision of the past. You see, you remember his passage to India, isn't it? Passage to India, yes. Passage to more than India, he says then afterwards. Very fine. It's wonderful how he goes back, you see, to the past, you see, back to reason's early paradise, to early intuitions and so on. Yes. Now there he says, he repeatedly goes through repeatedly through his vision of the past, he gets to it. Opening to ideal future, the organic universal movement of bygone nations, and the ages and the labor and creation of the present, and some nobler coming turn to a freedom of unified completion of the movement of union. The journey done, that is the quotation from passage. Journey done, the journeymen come home, and man and art with nature fused again. The Almighty Leader now for once has signaled his wand. He has given his signal with his wand. And some part of his work, as in the passage to India, it opens out even into a fuller and a profounder sense of its meaning. He sees it here as a new voyage of the human spirit. As if the human spirit was voyaging to a new country, to a new realm of experience, to a new plane of consciousness. Oh, farther sail. You remember his word? Yes, yes. Oh, farther sail. For we are bound where mariner has not yet dared to go. No, the first line begins with sail forth, steer for deep waters only. Steer for the deep waters only. For we are bound where mariner has not yet dared to go, and we will risk the ship, ourselves and all. Then after some lines, oh daring joy, but safe, are they not all the seas of God? And with a singular clear first seeing of the ideal goal and the ideal way of the conversion of the intellectual and vital into the spiritual self, he calls the spirit of man to the adventure. Whitman calls the man, spirit of man, to an adventure. The circumnavigation of the world begins. Of man, the voyage of his mind's return to reason's early paradise, back to wisdom's birth, to innocent intuitions, again with fair creation. This opening out of the human spirit from intellectual and vital being to the deepest spirit in him, and indicating the possibility of a direct intuitive approach to the highest truth without any intervention of intellect. That is the sense of what is coming to mankind, you see, through poetic expression. Yes. Back again to wisdom's birth, to inmost intuitions, innocent intuitions, again with fair creation. And then Sri Aurobindo writes in his future poetry, he casts forward to the ideal heart of this movement of man into the sense of divine unity, which is its completion, and brings out the divinity of the soul of man and its kinship to the divinity of the eternal. O thou transcendent, nameless, the fiber and breath, light of the light, shedding forth universes, thou center of them, thou mightier center of the true, the good, the loving, how should I think, how breathe a single breath, how speak, if out of myself I could not launch to those superior universes? Swiftly I shrivel at the thought of God, at nature and its wonders, time, base, and death. But that I, turning, call to thee, O soul, O actual me. Hand low, thou gently masterest the earth, thou matest time, smilest contented death, and fillest, swellest full the vastness of space. That is from his passage to India. Then he foresees the coming of the kinship of God and man to conscious fruition in oneness. There, further, that in the same line, you see, greater than stars or suns, bounding, O soul, thou journeyest forth. See, now man is living under the shadow of matter. He is small, matter is great. Here is somebody who says he is greater than the suns and the stars. That's what he must realize. And that is how he must act. He is unfortunately find that he is small and matter is great. That is, he finds atomic energy will do something terrible. What atomic energy? It has no life. It is you. You have the power. Greater than suns and stars, bounding, O soul, thou journeyest forth. What love than thine could wider amplify? What aspirations, wishes outweigh thine and ours, O soul? What dreams of the ideal? What plans of purity, perfection, and strength? What cheerful willingness for others' sake to give up all, for others' sake to suffer all? Reckoning ahead, O soul, when thou the time achieved, surrendered, copest, frontest God, yieldest the aim attained, as filled with friendship, love complete, the elder brother found, the younger melts in fondness in his arms. So that is the unity of the human soul with the divine. You see, the meeting of the individual soul with the eternal divinity, that is his deepest soul. Sri Aurobindo says, these passages, one of the seers of old time, reborn in our times, might so have expressed himself in a modern and intellectualized language. These passages send forward an arc light of prophetic expression on what is at the very heart of the new movement of humanity. It is this which is indicative of the future progress of man and his movement towards the truth. It is in some degree an indication of that which the 20th century is slowly turning to lay hold of, to develop and make its own in a closer actuality of insight and experience. The idea in these and cognate passages anticipates the new age, but the language and the method are still that of the poetic intellect straining to some fullest power of its intelligence and speech. That is about Whitman. Now he takes up another. In England itself, there is a new intuitive interpretation of soul and mind of man, of soul and mind of, in nature. A thought which casts its fathom beyond the passion of life and clarity of intelligence. And it starts sounding a suggestion of the hidden and the infinite in all that it touches. This is what the poetic spirit in England, in some of its representatives, is doing, not in all its expression. There are many aberrations and moving at a tangent. In each of the forerunners of the new spirit, the truth of the above is illustrated with a characteristic individuality. In Stephen Phillips, for example, the thought is not uncommon. He is very common, ordinary thought, and his output also is not voluminous. He has written only 2 or 3 small books, you see. Christ in Hades, and I think another is Marpesa. Yes, Marpesa and Christ in Hades, I think, are the only 2 well-known works of Stephen Phillips, you see. Now, it's not uncommon, but the turn of utterance, the self-knowledge catching the vibration from the depth of life, that is unusual. In rare moments, he catches the intensity of sensation, or through that intensity, he passes to perception of the soul and the emotion of nature. Even in inanimate and inconscient aspect of nature, he catches the spirit. For instance, in the Christ in Hades, he says, trees motionless in an ecstasy of rain. Trees motionless in an ecstasy of rain. You see? There is a long passage on love, but there is no time to go through it otherwise. You see, not for this that I love thee, but infinity above the broods, and thou art full of whispers and of shadows. That's a long poem, you see, in which uh, thou tellest me what the winds have uttered not, what the sea, yes, what the sea, yes, rushes to the cliffs to tell, and so on, so on. There is a long poem on love, you see, by Stephen Phillips. And he says that it is not for these that I love thee, but infinity above the broods, and thou art full of whispers and shadows. Well, that infinity. And then I am conscious of of birth in other stars and life long ago, and so on. He is speaking of love only. But there you see the transformation of this, the sensation and the feeling and the experience turned into quite a suggestion of the infinite and the eternal, you see. There is a straining of the particular to meet and be one with the universal and the infinite. The experience is particular and individual. And the straining is not only to widen out into the universal, but into the infinite. He is speaking of only his own personal experience, but he says infinity, above the broods. And then afterwards, what the sea and the wind have not been able to say, it is that which you convey to me, and so on. You see, the concept, the getting back into and the individual experience, of either vital or emotional or sensational life. Well, that is the trend of psychological movement in the poet's consciousness. He is not only receiving a experience on the plane of his senses or vital being or emotional being, but that is being transformed into it is being completely changed into a suggestion of something much more universal and infinite. Well, the individual is only an excuse or a point on which he finds that it is the universal and the infinite that is finding expression. That love is an eternal element and not an individual experience. You see? And then it is full not only of infinity, but it's eternity itself. This is a prosaic way of putting it, but when it is put in the poem, then you get at the thing in the right way, you see. When you say it, then philosophers will say, you prove it. But when a poet says, well, it goes home without any proof because it doesn't require any proof. Because it's intuitive and straight away it catches the inmost being and convinces it, you see. If I read that passage to you, you will see how Stephen Philip, in his movement of expression of this, you know, yes, yes, there is a vision of the eternal continuity of passion in him and the suggestion of the infinite. Even the bodily passion takes in him the mystic character. It becomes of the mystic character. In Meredith, you find the emphasis is on the man's soul and on the hidden soul of earth nature. He feels the hidden soul of earth nature. There is a cry for perfection of life on earth, and the substance is Whitmanesque substance in Meredith, but there is a profounder touch and a more delicate closeness. And witness, you don't find the delicacy. You see, it's there. That is one of his failings. You see, the perfection of form. In Yeats, the earthly life of man is woven with the unseen, psychic life, which presses upon our earth life and supports it. In Yeats, at times, our world seems only a detached projection of some psychic world, as if this world is not the right world, it is only an imperfect projection from a more perfect world. Rose, I think, yes. Yes, the rose rose that blossoms in the deeps of my heart. You see, the all things uncomely. Yes, all things uncomely. The cry of the child on the roadside and the creak of the lumbering cart are injuring the image of thy beauty, a rose that blossoms in the deeps of my heart. Something, you see. Well, there you see his perception is that this world is a very imperfect projection of some perfect world of beauty. You see, a divine world of beauty. He reads brighter letters of an ideal and sees eternal beauty. There is one poem, Eternal Beauty Walking on the Veil. You remember that? Yes. By his reading behind the sign of life, there is in him an insistence of soul values, even in what has been considered external life. There you see this soul value, you see. The soul of spiritual element in AE is even more apparent. He is directly psychic and spiritual in his poetical expression. There is nothing. Scores of poems of his are symbolic and wonderful poems, wonderful poems. Because they're full of the other world, the psychic world which he has contacted, and the infinite and the eternal, and rendered in terms of poetic beauty. I mean, it's not that it lacks beauty at all. In fact, he also gives expression to a poem in which he speaks of, twice he speaks of the avatar, the incarnation. Krishna is an incarnation and so on. And it is repeated in T.S. Eliot again, in his 4 quartets. Eliot speaks of the avatar, the incarnation. You see, and the possibility of incarnation is significance to mankind. That you find the Eastern strain in these poems. You see, the strain of the East coming out in literary expression of the West, some of the best exponents of the Western poetry. The light of the spirit is breaking through the veil of human intelligence in AE. The poetry of Whitman and his successor has been that of life, but of life broadened, illumined, and raised by a strong intellectual intuition of the self of man and the large soul of humanity. It is not the mere human, vital individual or physical or intellectual man, but large soul of humanity and the deeper soul or self of man. At the subtlest elevation of all that has yet been reached stands, or rather wings and floats in a high intermediate region, the poetry of Tagore. Not in complete spiritual light yet, but amid an air shot with its seekings and glimpses, a sight or a cadence found in a psycho-spiritual heaven of subtle and delicate soul experience, transmuting the earth tones by the touch of its radiance. That's what you find in Tagore. Now, the question is, in what then will this modern intellectuality and modern trend in poetry culminate? If it only repeats the past and remains merely intellectual, then it will lead to poetical decadence. There are critics who actually believe that decadence is the only possibility, that the way in which some of the modern people are writing free verse, which is nothing different from most colloquial phrase of life, you see, they write something absolutely without any reference to inner self at all, because they write something which they think surrealistic poetry, for instance. It means nothing. They say that why do you want poetry to mean anything? They openly declare that poetry must not mean anything. If it means anything, it's not poetry. Poetry is poetry. Why do you want to know anything about the meaning? There it is, either take it or leave it. That's how surrealists argue, you see. Broken bits of fantasy, dream state, suggestion, an abnormal idea that has come, or some perception of something out of the way, and you put it in your poetry. That is so surrealistic poetry. Why do you want that it should mean anything? And to that extent, the logic is gone in poetic creation now. And that is where W.B. Yeats, in one of his books, yes, Anthology of Modern Poetry, Oxford book, in his introduction, he says that, he's training language to unnatural expression, one thing, and he tries to say that I want to express the very essence of the thing. And in trying to bring the essence of the essential form, well, he divests of all beauty and gives us the most essential thing, the bone. And the bone is neither aesthetically justified, as neither it is the horror of life and horror of death, he says, in his criticism, you see, of modern poetry. So that there is more of critical faculty and then strained effort at creation, an artificial, kicking up of either vital being or subconscious movement or something unusual in man's nature, and bringing it to expression and thinking that it is a new creation, which is not. Well, that those things are present. He is pointing out to positive strains which can lead to some way out of the present, you know, turmoil or the boiling pot of psychological unsettlement of values of life from cultural life. What will be the way out? Well, he's trying to make out some kind of prognostication and see the forces at work. If it only repeats the past and remains merely intellectual, then it will lead to poetical decadence, no doubt. And there are critics who actually believe that that's the only possibilities. There are others who advocate the breaking up of the old molds as the only chance for poetry to survive. In fact, there has been numerous efforts in that direction in all languages of the world. Everywhere they have broken the old mold of poetic expression, prosody, and set foot measure and set way of doing things, pentameter and iambics, and all that is broken, and they want to do something new. And they think that by doing something new with the form, the spirit also will come. Now, that is not always, doesn't always follow. You only break the form and arrive at something formless or something vague or something unesthetic, to put it mildly, if you have not the corresponding substance or the soul which creates the form. It is the soul that must create adequate form. If it is only a labor at the technique, you can have many interesting technical experiments, but technical experiment is not artistic triumph. You cannot complicate the two, because you have got a new technique which is interesting. The painters nowadays do tremendous designing. Go on designing, you see. Now you can create infinite number of patterns. designs of line, designs of shapes. If you watch a scientific in the laboratory, you will see that a pendulum can give you wonderful designs. So, yes, it can give wonderful design by tracing it on a sandpaper or on a table of sand. You see, because it will go on changing, and you will see wonderful. Mercury can give you in a dish like this wonderful patterns when you give either an electric current or a shock from outside. Like that, if you strike, it will give you patterns there. Now, there are any number of possibility of designs and patterns and of line of shapes, triangles, cubes, pentagons. You can do that. It is interesting and good in its own way, quite nice. If you say it is great art, well, I don't know, because then you have to see whether that evokes in the human. They will say, why should it evoke anything? It is new. Well, we do. Every new place where you go to in nature is new, and therefore it attracts us by the newness. But the newness of nature is surcharged with a soul. It is not merely a new. The thing does not strike you because it is new, but it's a new form of something which is there. When people say that you go to a new place and you are struck by natural sceneries very similar everywhere, and yet it always wears a new aspect wherever you go. A lake or a river or a hill or a landscape, well, you always find new. It is not merely the newness of the outer form and sensation, but also a new presentation of the same spirit that is behind that you feel, really speaking, and it is that which attracts you if you are really attracted. Well, in the design, if there is no expression of yourself, it is not new. It is mechanical. Yes, it is interesting, we'll admit, but it is not great art creation. Well, in order to find the correct answer to this question, we must repeat once more that pure intellect does not create poetry. Even the ordinary creations, it is inspired imaginative reason that plays a chief part in creation. The true creator is a soul in the creator, and it has not yet exhausted its possibilities. The soul has not exhausted all its possibilities, so there is no fear of thinking that, oh, now everything has come to an end and now nothing new can be created. Sri Aurobindo is optimistic about the future poetry. 57, where is it? Everywhere there is a seeking after some new thing, he says. A discontent with the molds, ideas, and powers of the past, and a spirit of innovation, desire to get at the deeper powers of language, rhythm, form, because a subtler and a vaster life is in birth, because a greater life is seeking birth, therefore there is a seeking after something new everywhere. There are deeper and more significant things to be said than have yet been spoken. And poetry, the highest essence of speech, must find a fitting voice for them. So there is an unrest which is indicative of a greater birth that must take place in the realm of our poetical creation. He sees that the human intelligence is on the verge of an attempt to rise through the intellectual into the intuitive mind. The intellect is being overpassed and the effort is to enter intuition or intuitive mentality. The intellect is not sufficiently powerful as a mediator between life and spirit. Life and spirit, if an mediator required, mind or intellect is not enough. Intuitive faculty is the one that can bring the intuitions of the spirit to life. In order to show that this is not a mere speculation, he observed that a glint of this change is already visible, and in poetry there is already the commencement of such a great reading. The conscious effort of Whitman, the tone of Carpenter, the significance of the poetry of A.E., the rapid and immediate fame of Tagore are its first signs. It is the first sign that the thing is coming. The idea of the poet who is also the rishi, the seer, has made again its appearance. Man is moving from thought to vision, from intellectual experiment to intuitive experience. This is the prognosis. The wide, comprehensive awakening of mind, the very intellectualism of it has given the modern mind a greater and a stronger subjective turn. And the subjective personality of the poet is more important today than it was in traditional or conventional compliance on his part. It is the self of the creator that counts. Be it remarked that this subjectivity is not withdrawn and mystic and aloof, but it is something that embraces the whole of life and whole of nature. The increasing stress on psychological observation in poetry and literature means a deeper penetration into the subjective being, a greater self-knowledge for man. Man is acquiring a conscious and intimate subjectivity. The impact of Eastern spirit, with its strong foundations of spirituality and philosophy, upon the modern European mind is also having an influence in the direction of awakening a deeper spirituality or subjectivity. It tends to encourage subjective experience as a test for spiritual reality. The modern mind has its eye turned more to the future than to the past or even to the present. In thought and life, we move more consciously toward the future than man used to do in the past. This is quite true. 5-year plans in every country. So far as even economics is concerned, apart from other fields of life. What this movement must lead to in the end, supposing this comes up, what it will lead to in the end, if it gets to its end, and does not stop short or turn aside after some other lure, must be some direct seeing by the soul of this soul, or self everywhere in its delivered force of vision. The direct vision of the aspiration expressed in Indian language, Atmani, Atmanam, Atmana. Within the soul, by the soul, see the soul. Not the sensuous or the imaginative or the intellectual or the vital insistence, but a greater potency using and surmounting them, and the soul's own delivered self-vision in all things, and delight in its greatness, light and beauty. That would be the legitimate or logical conclusion of this tendency if it came to its highest fruition, you see. Then he lays down one rule also. In greatest art and poetry, there should be something of the calm of the impersonal, basing and elevating the effort and the struggle of personality. Something of the largeness of the universal, releasing and harmonizing the troubled concentrations of the individual existence. Something of the sense of the transcendent, raising the inferior, ignorant, and uncertain powers of life towards a greater strength and light and delight. And when art and poetry can utter the fullest sense of these things, it is then that they will become the greatest fortifiers and builders of the soul of man, and assure it in the grandeur of its own largest self and spirit. The poetry of Europe has been a voice intensely eager and moved, but restless and troubled, and without a sure base of happiness and repose, vibrating with passion of life, and avid of its joy and pleasure and beauty, but afflicted also by its unrest, grief, tragedy, discord, insufficiency, incertitude, capable only of lesser harmonies, not of any great release and satisfaction. Taken the whole view of, poetic output of the whole Western mind or Western spirit, well, that you would say is a correct reading, you see. The art and poetry of the East have been creation of a larger and a quieter spirit. There you see the creator is moving on a very quiet and impersonal basis. Larger and quiet, intensely responsive as in the Far East, to deeper psychic influences, significances, and finding there fine and subtle harmonies of the soul's experience. Or as in India, expressing in spite of ascetic creed of vanity and illusion, much rather the greatness and power and satisfied activity of the human thought, human life and action, and behind it, the communion of soul with the eternal. This background of the eternal and repose and peace and calm and impersonality is a characteristic of this artistic creation on the eastern side. The poetic future, reconciling all these strains. Now, the future poet will reconcile these two strains, taking the highest at its keynote and interpreting the rest in its intensity and its largeness, will offer to the human mind a more complex aesthetic and spiritual satisfaction, express a more richly filled content of self-experience, raised to more persistent sight of things absolute and infinite, and a more potent and all-comprehending release into the calm and delight of the spirit. That is what the future spirit is expected to do, to reconcile and bring the delight into life. And supposing it reaches its very highest, then he says that it might reach, the expression might take the form of what the Veda used to call the mantra. The inspiration received by the soul, or by the soul in the heart, you can say. The mantra is the intuition or inspiration received in the heart by the soul of man. That is the mantra. Mantra is not an incantation full of magical efficacy and so on. That is the later degenerated meaning of mantra. Mantra, they say, is something incantation by which you can do some magic or harm to somebody or good to somebody and so on. That is the secondary and derivative meaning of mantra. Mantra is, in its original sense, the power of inspiration, you see, received direct by the heart, seen by the soul. It is in fact this spirit expressing itself in sound. The spirit finding direct expression in sound. That is the mantra. You see, when the spirit expresses itself, catches hold of a rhythm of sound and puts itself into it, well, that becomes a mantra. A vibration capable of evoking that consciousness again. The Veda speaks in one of its symbolic hints. It speaks of the fountain of eternal truth. There is a fountain of eternal truth, round which stand the illumined powers of thought. Fountain of truth is there, and illumined powers of thought, not rational and practical thought, not utilitarian thought and logic. Yes, we must remember. Illumined powers of thought and life stand round that eternal fount. I mean, the fountain of eternal truth. There, under the eyes of delight and the face of imperishable beauty of the mother of creation and bride of the eternal spirit, mother of creation who is the bride of the eternal spirit, the illumined powers of thought and life stand round the fountain of eternal truth. The face of imperishable beauty of the mother of creation and the bride of the eternal spirit, they lead their immortal dance. They lead their immortal dance round the fountain of eternal truth. The poet visits that marvelous source. The poet visits that marvelous source in his superconscient mind and brings to us some strain or some vision of her face and work to find the way into that circle with the waking self. He is to be a seer poet. He is to be the seer poet. And discover the highest power of the inspired word, the mantra. That will be the highest form and the spirit of poetry that might come to express itself in man's mind. I think we stop there for today and take up perhaps a little bit of it tomorrow.
Where is that last part from?
Uh,
Where is that last quote from?
from Aurobindo, no, it must be from Future Poetry, I think. Yes, page 312 if you want. Then we have to break off the subject. I don't know whether we should go. Go to Purani. Said the future poetry. You see, this is one. Now, he speaks of 5 great sons of poetry. These shining, lights. 5 sons of poetry, according to him. Truth, beauty, delight, life, and the spirit. These are the 5 sons of poetry. The shining lights which poetry works under or lives under whose light poetry thrives. Truth, beauty, delight, life, and the spirit. These are indeed the 5 greater ideal lamps, or rather the 5 sons of poetry, he says in future poetry, you see. The subject matter, the field of poetry is extended and a broad, all-inclusive ideal is placed before poetry. The relation of truth and poetry is defined as follows. You see, poetry true is interpreter of truth, but in the forms of innate beauty. Poetry gives truth, but in the form of innate beauty, and not so much of intellectual truth, the truth offered by the critical mind as the intimate truth of the being. It deals not so much with things thought as with things seen, not with the authenticities of analytical mind, but with the authenticities of the synthetic vision and seeing spirit. Truth, as she is seen by us in the end, is an infinite goddess. The very front and face of infinity, that is truth. And Aditi herself, the illimitable mother of all the gods, that's the Vedic conception of infinity, that she is the mother of all the gods. And it's the gods that come down to the mind through intuition, inspiration, revelation, and inspired thought. They are the gods. Really, the gods are the powers that are born out of the infinity of truth, and find expression in illumined inspirations, intuitions, revelations, and so on. And they come down and strike the human consciousness either on the mental plane or on the vital plane or the emotional plane, or directly get into the soul and find expression. The spirit, the last that he speaks of, gives not only the greater light of truth and vision, but the breath of greater living, because spirit is the self of life. When people insist nowadays that, oh, you are speaking of spirituality, but what of life? There is always a fear and an implied contradiction between life and spirit, because they do not know that it is spirit that is life. Life is only one expression of the spirit, or one field for expression of the spirit, as mind is another, you see. And this opposition between life and spirit is the most artificial thing, which keeps the spiritual truth and light away from life, and also spiritual power. And life thinks in its present form that what it has is something marvelous and wonderful and something not worth losing. It is because it doesn't know that spirit is more full of and holds greater life and greater powers than life can ever hold. Because it's surcharged with greater truth also. This element is present in Whitman, this element of spirit and life together, and is repeated in Meredith and A. and moves between earth and heaven in Yeats. To insist on life as it is would be a mistake. Would be to mistake the work of poetry and to mistake the sense of life. To say that poetry must deal only with life as it is is to mistake the work of poetry. It is not to confirm life in what it is. Life must reveal its greater step and its greater possibilities. Not as it is, but it must rise to a greater possibility, potentiality. Light of truth, breath of life, great and potent things though they are insufficient to give poetry the touch of immortality. If poetry only deals with the light of truth, or it brings with the breath of life, or deals with, spirit, they are great things, but they are insufficient to give poetry the touch of immortality and perfection, even a little of which is enough to carry it safe through the ages. Unless the soul and the form of delight and beauty take possession of the seeing of truth and give it immortality to breath and body of life. The poet's business should not be primarily to concern himself only with the truth, though the inspiration of a truth that is beyond mind might give poetry a much higher light, a far greater extent of, its a field. But if it is to become immortal and retain its hold of life, then poetry must inevitably have the two gods, delight and beauty. If delight and beauty are not the moving forces, the very central spring of poetical creation, well, the creation will not participate in immortality. It can be very good and great creation, nobody doubts that. But if it is to become immortal, it must have the spirit of delight and beauty animating it. And Sri Aurobindo says that for the poet, he puts it very finely. Where is it? Yes. Delight is the soul of existence, and beauty the intense impression, the concentrated form of delight. Therefore, if the essence of existence is to be expressed, it must be expressed as delight. You
Would
see?
you mind reading that again? Delight is the soul of existence.
Beauty, the intense impression, the concentrated form of that delight. And then he goes further and says, for the poet, the moon of beauty and delight is a greater Godhead even than the sun of truth and the breath of life. You see, the sun of truth is not so important to poetry as the moon of beauty and delight. Yes, that's it. Beauty and delight, whatever form it takes, has an unaging youth, an eternal moment, an immortal presence. That is perfectly true. He says a small thing expressed with beauty has a chance for lasting. A very great thing expressed with labor of intellect has only a short life. But you see a petal of rose. Here is a poem, I don't know whose, it might be Swinburne, I don't remember who. But he says the petals of rose had fallen when somebody passed, and they were like little ships that were floating on the surface of, the earth. Yes, it's only about a petal of rose which is insignificant and not going to last. But the perception that you see there is charged with something which makes that line go on living longer and longer, you see. It's the sense of beauty and delight, you see. Not what is said and how big is the thing that is said. It does not deal with the fate of an empire. No, it doesn't deal with that. And fate of the empire is so dull that after 100 years people forget where was that empire. They don't care. But something said in a way which embodies that beauty and delight, well, people retain for forever. That is what Keats wanted to say. Truth is beauty and beauty is truth. That's all that you care. You have to know, or is it not? Well, you need to know, is it not? And that is the truth. That the truth of beauty is a greater truth than mere truth of the intelligence. The day when we get back to the ancient worship of delight and beauty will be our day of salvation. For without these things there can be neither an assured nobility and sweetness in poetry and art, nor a satisfied dignity and fullness of life, nor a harmonious perfection of spirit. The poet then,
Would you repeat again?
yes, the day when we get back to the ancient worship of delight and beauty, this is in his future poetry. You will get it there in page 335. 335. Yes.
Ancient worship
If
of beauty.
beauty, yes, of delight and beauty will be our day of salvation. For without these things there can be neither an assured nobility or sweetness in poetry and art, nor a satisfied dignity and fullness of life, nor a harmonious perfection in spirit. The poet becomes a spokesman of the eternal spirit of beauty and delight and shares in the highest creative and self expressive rapture which is close to the original ecstasy that made existence the divine ananda, the divine delight, out of which the world was created. You see? The poet, when he rises to this plane of beauty and delight, participates in that creative delight which the Supreme had when the world or universe was projected out of him due to sheer ecstasy of delight. You see the dance of creation. The poetic delight and beauty are born of a deeper rapture and not of surface mind's excited interest and enjoyment of life and existence. The poetry of the future will kindle these five lamps of our being: truth, beauty, delight, life, and spirit, but raise them up more on high and light, and light with them a broader country. Many countries indeed, now hidden from our view, will make them not only long, not any longer lamps in some limited temple of beauty, but suns in the heavens of our highest mind, and illumin, illuminative of our widest as well as our inmost life. It will be a poetry of a new, largest vision of himself and nature and God and all things which is offering itself to man, and of its possible realization in a nobler and a more divine manhood. I think that gives you something of the poetry of the future and how it is related to his work and his vision of life.
And I didn't know if it was from T.S. Eliot. Desire to express the essence, but gives the bones. Was that about
That
T.S.
was no
Eliot?
W.B. Yeats.
Oh, that was
Yeats.
that was about Yeats.
No, Yeats about modern poetry.
Oh, Yeats about modern poetry.
Yes. Lucas is a much stronger critic of modern poetry than anybody. F.L. Lucas. Lucas. He says, oh, the modern poets. And then he says, you see, they are, what is it? Requesting the passers-by to overhear them. You see?
Now he's raising itself from thought to vision.
Yes.
To seeing, not thinking.
Yeah.
That
Yes, yes, yes. That should be coming. Yes. Coming more and more. It's not that it's dominant, but you see, a small thing when it begins, it's very small, and it has to broaden slowly. It doesn't at once, occupy the whole field. But there must be science enough to show that it is working. At times, suggestions of the lower being or something of the, the queer realm of fantasy, dream life or dream state, broken bits of dream or imagination or fantasy or fancy or subconscious impulse or something that is queer and bizarre, they get attracted by it and think that is the essence of subjectivity.
Well, didn't he end up in an institution, mental institution?
Well, let us see now how it ends. That is the thing to be seen. It's for the poets to see. Well, there are now greater heights, and so they will have somebody to give the watermark of, the highest watermark. Now, there are two or three. C.D. Lewis is there, then.
Well, no, what I meant was that when Whitman started out, he got this,
Yes.
and the power was so overwhelming that he took a detour and stayed in the vital toward the end. Is that true?
No. His vision was that he wanted to hold the earth and life spirit also, and then he could transform that into the vision of man's greater spirit than his life spirit, than his mind spirit, a spirit that is eternal and divine. That is his vision, and he wants to see it here. Insistence of him is that the earth is a scene of any greater ascent to perfection, you see. It is not that perfection will have to be attained somewhere else. But you see, if I take that, then there will be 2 months you go on only with poetry.
There's one other speculation, and I wondered when you talked about the patterns of atoms and forms,
Yes.
lights and shadows and things. Is this revealing to man that the very material of which things are made is inherently beauty of
Yes,
form
yes,
and texture and
yes.
line? So
It automatically
that is-
takes a form and a design. You can see that in nature. It automatically takes a design.
So that is,
So that is inherent in nature itself.
and here it is, not being formed by any man. It's
Yes.
inherent in beauty.
That it is not merely fighting, it is a cause.
Yes.
That's it. And all the suffering is nothing else but a price which one is prepared to pay for maintaining a great cause. And that's why he admired and he liked that it should be like that. There should be fight. That's how, and there should be more people taking part in it, and doesn't matter suffering. And that is the vision. That's what see. It's not the fact, but the significance of the fact, the meaning, what it means, not what it is. Otherwise, poetry cannot be created. True poetry cannot be created. Not what is nothing. And what is sometimes very big, but it means nothing. A big pile of cement gathered together means nothing. A pile of metal gathered together is nothing. A big war fought for lower purposes is nothing. Spiritually, significance.
Yes.
But a small thing can become very significant. You see? Because it's not the size, but the inner significance which you endow it with.
John, there's a lovely poem here that he's called Evanescence, in which he mentions the Vedic spheres.
Yes.
Evanescence.
Whose is that?
A.E.
Oh, yeah, I have got this poem. I have got it. Whole poems, all the poems are with me. Handwritten, yes.
Yeah, George Russell, he's a famous poet, writer,
He just
painter,
wrote the name A.E.
and politician too, Irish.
Yes, he stood for the Irish movement. I think the Sinn Féin movement. Agriculturist, yes, I think agriculturist.
Yeah.
You know the camel vision?
Deepest trance, but yet how gay we were. Beauty, the fiery plaything ran through the sun-gilded air. From dazzling cloud to dazzling cloud it climbed. Then from that height unto your feet it sped adown, long cataracts of light. It flickered mid the daffodils and danced their gentle dance, then rose up slenderly in air. It was as still as trance. It entered in. That magic thing into your being flowed through lips and eyes and fluttered hair. Its precious substance glowed. Its fairy candles burned on brow and ivory slender limb. Lights that the spirit only sees and to all else are dim. It was so nigh I broke the trance to clutch that radiant thing. But it was gone, fleeter than bird upon the homing wing. Where is its home? Could you and I, wherever the light appears, cry at the wonder, I am that, as did the Vedic seers? How can we stay it? By what art? However swift desire, it's gone, its precious substance is unclutchable as fire.
Isn't it beautiful?
And then he is taken under the sea light. And in that whole vision, it is a sight of, it's not the sea and this thing, you see, it's the whole of life and so on. But when he comes back from there to his hillock where he was sitting again, it is something superb. You can't imagine. People don't understand it when they read it, I know. At least 60 out of 100 won't understand it. It is as if a fisherman's boy has gone and you see, it's not that at all. That's the symbol he has put, taken hold of, you see. But the description is so vivid of the sea and the what happens to the boy and so on, and when he comes back, that you don't think it is a symbol. It is as if he is describing only the sea, which is not. And there is another, a French poet, I think. That is a marvelous poem.
It isn't in there, Purani, that when you speak of isn't in there?
No, that is not here. That is not here. That is not. It's a long one, pretty long. You see, it is an old fisherman sitting and talking. And suddenly, one of them who remembers when he was young, it is a long thing. I can't tell you the whole thing. It is so poetic, you see. They are sitting quiet and now they are old and they don't go to the sea any longer, 80 years or 90 years, and they are talking about the sea life. Suddenly, one of them remembers his young age and how he first time he went to fishing. Well, that's how it begins. And then he goes in imagination there and he's sitting there and all his experience of sea life. It is the whole infinity and, the cosmic life and the experience of the light and the thing with which he comes back. It is wonderful. Can't imagine. This Frenchman is I think it is on a graveyard. What is his name? A poem on the graveyard. Oh, it's so wonderful. This is it.
About the sea and
Well,
fish.
yes, that I will get you. I'll got in my note. I forget now. It's the longest poem at the end of his collected works. If you ever get his collected works, edited by him, it's last. He said, "This is my authentic collection," and in that it is nearly the last poem or one before the last. And then he works up the whole imagination. See, the ships that are flying are the doves that are on the surface of some globe, and the sunlight is shining upon the sea. It is marvelous. I am perfectly sure any man, doesn't require education, doesn't require culture at all. Any straight approach is always answered. That is the law. Many of my expositions, I give this instance that when you turn the telephone dial, you are sure that you are contacting your friend number so and so, isn't it? Well, more sure is your contact with the divine when you turn the dial of the psychic or heart in the correct way. It can never fail to reach. It can never fail. There is no mistake in the machinery. The machinery is foolproof.
And the dawn does come in the darkest moment
Yes.
with that yearning. Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, communication doesn't take place, then there is no genuine aspiration. That's all. Sir.
Have the sign of the future dawn. And no, that isn't quite ready to break yet. I mean, are we passing through sort of a relax? Or, since those poets, there haven't been any, have there, with that?
No, the only one or two signs you can see is that there has been the same strain in about half a dozen or a dozen of the modern writers. Some streaks of it you find. Then you find that in Sri Aurobindo's creation you have the watermark. So, well, if the poets want to reach it, there it is. Whether poetic genius will attempt that or will remain somewhere in the intermediate region, satisfied with what expression they get or what subject matter attracts them, is to be seen. But it is bound to come sometime.
And Louis Untermeyer, the great American critic, has compiled a new volume of modern American poetry, very modern. I haven't been able to get it yet, but I got over to the library about 6 months ago, a little slim volume of poetry written by young people with all, I think they were in their 30s or late 20s. And I was surprised and delighted to find a young woman who wrote some very fine poems in nature. She was up in Oregon. And they had a wonderful spirit.
Yes, I think the future spirits must be there to take hold of the line of progress, you see. And I think that they must be coming. And well, if the atmosphere becomes more congenial, you will find a greater number of people devoting themselves to this activity and creating greatly. There is a Greek poet, I think, Kazantzakis, I think. Kazantzakis or Kazantzakis. He has written a modern Odyssey of 30,000 lines, translated by an American professor into English. Modern Odyssey. Odyssey, a modern interpretation or modern form or something like that, you see. Kazantzakis. Kazan, K-A-Z-E-N, I think. And then Zaki, I don't remember exactly the spelling of his name. He's a Greek writer. He has written in Greece, in Greek language, you see. But it is translated in English, Modern Odyssey. Now there the subject matter, is retained on the plane of life, you see, on life. And then how life is, he has taken up the same Odyssey subject, Helen, Helen becomes a modern woman and goes and she marries somebody else and so on. It's a very interesting poem, but canvas is big of life, but the perception and the vision is only on the same scene. Again, the same sun was shining, and man had not done anything that would be called fulfillment of himself. You see, he had not reason to fulfillment. On the scene, when the whole poem ends, the sun is again shining. At the beginning of the poem, the sun was shining, and at the end of the same scene, the sun is shining, and as it were, there was a movement in a circle where things were without many high or deep significance. That is how I seem to feel it. Well, I don't know, some people. There are fine passages in it which are very good passages. And the author died on the North Pole in one of his flights, I think, and in his book, in his poem, he had an idea the hero also dies in the North Pole. And in the North Pole, why? On some flight or something happened and there was an accident or whatever it was, he actually died on the North Pole. And in the poem, the hero also dies on the North Pole. At last goes to the North Pole and there he ends his life on the North